With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, knowing that here on earth God's work must truly be our own. Those words, spoken by President John F. Kennedy on January 20th, 1961, at the height of American optimism, weren't just a call to hope. They were a warning. Because leadership doesn't end when the promise is fulfilled. Responsibility doesn't disappear when victory is secured. And faith doesn't mature in moments of triumph. It's revealed in what we do after God has come through. That's exactly where Joshua finds himself, old, near the end of his life, standing before a nation that has seen God do everything he promised to do. The land has been given. The enemies have been defeated. The victories have been undeniable. And Joshua 21 says it plainly. Not one word of all the good promises the Lord has made failed. All came to pass. And yet Joshua isn't celebrating. He's warning. Because the greatest danger to Israel isn't what they haven't received. It's what they might do now that they have it. Joshua understood something every generation eventually learns the hard way. Faith is easiest when you're desperate and hardest when you're comfortable. So he delivers one final speech, not about conquest, but about choice. Not about miracles, but about allegiance. Not about God's power, but about human responsibility. And tonight, we're sitting in that tension between promise and pressure, between grace and obedience, between what God has done and what he now asks us to do. Because like Israel, we live in the aftermath of answered prayers. We worship on fulfilled promises. We inherit victories we didn't earn. And the question facing us isn't whether God is faithful. The question is whether we will be. Joshua's final words echo across centuries and land directly in our moment, in our time. God has done his part. Now choose this day who you will serve. Now, in this episode, we're also going to be considering Paul. Paul never visited Colossus, yet the gospel exploded there anyway. Why? Because faith didn't stay centralized. Epaphras heard the message in Ephesus and carried it home. Colossus was pluralistic, politically Roman, religiously crowded, spiritually pressured. Faith there wasn't tested by persecution alone, but by assimilation. And when Paul addresses slavery in Philemon, he doesn't lead a revolution with slogans. He plants a theological time bomb. Receive him, no longer as a slave, but as a brother. It's the same tension Joshua faced, and it's the same one that we face now. I'm so glad to be joined by such a distinguished group of gentlemen. We've got Pastor Cagia Scott in the house. Pastor Scott, good to see you.
Good to be seen.
We're starting this new year off with a bang with Dr. Sidney Freeman, making his debut on the Escape Room podcast. Dr. Freeman, of course, is the first Black tenured professor at the University of Oregon. Black excellence, Black history maker, a trailblazer, pioneer. Thank you so much for being on the program, Dr. Freeman, and of course, Pastor Howard, the head of the Sabbath School Department of the South Atlantic Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Gentlemen, you know, in when we look at you know what's going on in recent news, there was a statement issued by Catholic bishops against what we've been seeing on our social media pages, on our news feeds, on our television screens, people being swept up at a moment's notice without any kind of warning and taken off into a faraway detention center or shipped off to a faraway land. Joshua warned Israel that obedience becomes hardest after the miracle, when comfort and success masks our need for continued faithfulness. In the same moment, our culture wrestles with moral responsibility. Catholic bishops issued this special message on immigration, which was a rare, urgent statement condemning fear-based rhetoric and calling for dignity and meaningful reform for immigrants. How do we interpret this kind of prophetic witness in light of Joshua's call to sustained leadership and sustained obedience and adherence to God's calling?
Well, when you talk about comfort, first off, I was thinking, what you talking about comfort? What you talking about comfortable with success? That's what I thought at first. And then as I was thinking, the reality is, even though like we ain't fully out of all the stress as far as Black folks here in America, the reality is there is a level of comfort in comparison. there is a level of I'm comfortable because ICE ain't coming after me. There's a level of us and them where we good to be on this side of the track when it comes to immigration and something. And what you know, we got to follow Dr. King. Like we can't be quiet just because we not directly affected. Because when evil is being done, whether it's being done to you or your neighbor, it's in your neighborhood. When evil is being done, you got to speak up about it. And we could have a tendency to be like, it ain't us this time. You know what I'm saying? But reality is, you know, if it's them, it's us. And anytime anything is being done that is outside of Christ, then we ought to speak up. Then we ought to have a problem. Then we ought to fight against it. The gates of hell will not prevail. Like, they can't keep us out. So when hell is going on, we supposed to bust up in there and cause havoc. If it's happening to us, people like us or people not like us, we supposed to have a problem with it.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. I think that's very important and very powerful connection. And the link that I'm just reminded of is that no one is free until everybody is free. And when we look at our spiritual growth, even in the context of what Paul is dealing with in the Sabbath school lesson, it lets us know that he identified with everyone. And he knew firsthand because his context was in a prison. And so he related that. And so many times I think we can try to cover up our pain externally by not dealing with the issues that we're facing day by day.
Well, Dr. Freeman, go ahead. You were going to weigh in?
I think you're muted, Doc.
In the meantime, I really appreciate what both of you have mentioned, because, you know, comfort often, you know, comes at a point of spiritual stagnation. You know, when we feel as if we've there's nothing really more for us to do as a church, because we feel as if we're already hitting all the points. We're hitting all the boxes. We're having the evangelistic series. We're in the middle of a revival where we are seeing baptismal numbers at a steady level, not really, you know, at a rapid increase, but at a steady level for us to be comfortable enough to feel as if we're in a safe place. And we do everything right, you know, whether it be in our personal life, we give our tithe and offering, we do our devotion, we feel as if we're putting God in the right order, and we're making sure that everything is following through. But there's very little honest on us to actually, very little motivation for us to actually step outside of our comfort zone and grow. And it requires us to sometimes put ourselves in a situation where we're no longer taking a traditional route, but we're taking more of an active route in the streets and in the community. We're partnering with folks that we wouldn't normally partner with. We're developing coalitions with folks who don't really believe in the same health message that we believe in. We're starting to develop bonds with folks who have tattoos and piercings, right? Because the ultimate goal here in terms of combating injustice is to build relationships with people in the community to take a position against it. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the Catholic Church. The irony is, many of us call the Catholic Church Babylon. We call them, we look at them as if they're the big boogeyman to be afraid of in the end times, based on what we know in prophecy. And while we are getting comfortable doing the same thing, the same old thing, and they are the ones taking a more active, prominent role to try to reform how folks look at their church.
And
right?
let me jump in and say this. because like you quoted somebody who is a quotable person, and that's why the quote is out there. Like they're not your neighbor. So you found out what they said based on their position. The reality is, if I said it last week, you wouldn't know. And so for such a time as this, I'm just thinking about the young lady who why can't I think of? She had to go into the king, Mordecai's niece. What's her name? Oh,
Esther.
I have Esther. Esther was in her position for such a time as this. And we just have to be ready when we're in a position, when there's a mic in front of us, when we're in a position that we speak and it's going to go out there, that we have something to say. And that when God puts us in a position where our voices is going to be heard, then that's when it's time for us to step up. I'm not going to say that the Catholic Church is saying something that we're not saying because we heard a quote that we didn't hear from us. Is that particular person had a mic in the right place at the right time, and so it went out there. And like I said, I could say it tomorrow, and the world not gonna find out. You see what I mean? So yes, it's not that we not speaking up. It's not that we don't have anything to say. It's just you know, it's just time, because I don't want to beat us up and say what we're not doing, like we're not doing it. I think we might be. It's just that somebody else did it and they had a bigger microphone. If LeBron James came out and said something, more people would hear it than if I said something. And so if we're looking at Paul, what I loved about Paul was when he rubbed shoulders with people, like he was contagious. Like when he rubbed shoulders with you, if he was in the king's palace, by the time he leave, he got some converts in the palace that's spreading the word for him amongst their peers. And so if you look at Paul, everywhere he went, he rubbed off on people. And so that's when you think about the fact that some people have a louder voice than we do, but we may be connected to somebody that have a louder voice than we do. And so rub off on them so they can rub off and use that bigger microphone, that bigger stage, that bigger audience. And so, but it's our job to wherever we find ourselves, like Paul, whether it's in prison, whether it's in the king's prison or just a regular lockup in a small town, like wherever we find ourselves, we have to let our light shine so that we can have an effect on people that may have a bigger stage than we do. Yeah. That's exactly what Paul did.
And just going back to Joshua a little bit, it's interesting that he speaks more urgently after victory has been achieved than before. So why does success often weaken spiritual clarity instead of strengthen it? The thing that we've been fasting on and getting on our knees for and asking others to pray on our behalf for, when we finally get it, it seems like that success often weakens the spiritual clarity instead of strengthen it. And why is that?
It's drive. I mean, you're driven because something's pushing you. There's something to go after. I mean, you go to, what is it, a dog race, I believe it is. They have like a little fake rabbit, a motorized fake rabbit. Why? Because they need to chase something. Like you want them to go fast, put something faster in front of them that they want. And so it's normal for us to run faster, to work harder when we got a goal in front of us or we got something chasing behind us. Yeah. The reality is if we ain't getting chased or if we're not running after it, then there is a slowdown. We're not going as fast. We're not always intrinsically motivated. But God, we complain all we want, but God has a way of putting that dog behind us. Complain about that dog all you want, but if the dog's there, God might have sicked him on you because he needs you to run.
Pastor Scott, on that same vein, I have a question, because could it be said that as a people, African Americans were more hungry, we were more fervent, we were on our knees more in times of adversity, during slavery, during times of brutal oppression, lynchings, rapings, beatings, subjugation, not even being able to file suit in court because we were considered property. And then in the era of Jim Crow, which which was just a brand new form of keeping us down, in terms of keeping you out of certain communities, keeping you locked out of certain financial opportunities, keeping you restricted in terms of your mobility and your access to opportunities, whether it be economic opportunities or educational opportunities. And that followed by the civil rights movement, where people were literally being hosed down and beaten, and it was broadcasted on TV, and people saw the actual struggle for civil rights playing out in real time in the modern era. And now we're in an era where the gone are the days of black and white blatant segregation. We have more sophisticated forms of keeping our people out of certain opportunities, and it seems like we've become more complacent in the era where it's not so overt and in your face. Could it be said that we're not as fervent or as hungry spiritually as we used to be as a people, when we used to be very much in tune with how the Bible served as a guide as it pertains to Moses leading his people out of Egypt, and you have figures like Harriet Tubman leading folks out of slavery, and other trailblazers. Could it be that we are losing that fervor that our ancestors, the folks in previous generations, once had?
Yeah. I want to add very quickly, I think that some of those analogies could be applicable, but also I think what Pastor Scott was saying earlier is that without that dog, or without that force of evil or something negative that promotes or prompts us to take change, like the boycott, the bus boycott in Montgomery, all of those type of things have initiative. I think that if we looked at what Paul is dealing with here in this context, that he found himself in, was that he had to witness in every scenario. And I think maybe, yes, I think maybe we, for some, have arrived, and we think that we are have reached a certain status, and we don't feel the pain like our brown brothers are feeling right now. And we're like, hey, I've got my citizenship, so I'm safe, I'm good. But we have to understand that we all have to journey in this life together, and that's so important.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
All right, awesome. And thank you again for this opportunity to be on your platform. When thinking of the question that you posed around if people are not as fervent as they used to be, I wonder if it may look different now, just given the access to information that people have now. So as it relates to this is a generation that has had access to education in ways that other previous generations have not. Maybe not the same amount of, we can argue about having access to resources because this may be the first generation in many that are not necessarily making as much as our parents, for instance, may have had. But we have access to information and other things. And so the role of religion, the role of spirituality may not look as all-encompassing as it may have been in the past, meaning that the church was the central hub for Black empowerment, community uplift, whereas now there are different types of organizations, whether it be nonprofits, United Way, other organizations. So, if we're talking about the ways in which people perform their spirituality, we may be looking at the ways in which people bend down and they pray, for instance, right? Whereas people may not be doing some kind of physical prayer in that way, but they may be praying as they're walking along. So I think that we must be careful about how the ways in which we kind of frame spirituality, because I think there is a hunger. I do think there is a thirst for spirituality, but it may look different given that we're in a different generation who has access to different forms of spirituality, and they're questioning things in ways that we didn't have options in the past, or perceived to have those options.
Absolutely. I think, and in the same way that like this ain't 50 years ago, like there's not the same thing going on, and we don't have the same ways of expressing our spirituality. We also may need these days a different motivation. Like the same motivation may not happen. Like those dogs chasing that rabbit. Maybe these dogs these days, they don't even like rabbits. You know what I'm saying? So,
right.
So as a church, we got to make sure that the stimuli meets who you're stimulating. And as far as a pastor, my job is to motivate, encourage, give the ability to the people to go out and witness and spread the gospel. And so I gotta, like you said, I gotta not act like I'm dealing with the same people that they were dealing with 50 years ago. And I gotta know how to motivate and how to send them out. And I'm not even sending them out to the same place, because the world I'm sending them out to witness to ain't even the same world that it was 50 years ago. And so, like you said, things are changing. They might look different, but we got to make sure that we still keep the fire lit.
Pastor Scott, I wanted to follow up on what you're saying, because I think it's so important. It's so important now. This notion of pastoral care is going to be critical. I perceive that it's going to be critical moving forward. So I was blessed to have attended the PELC, the Pastoral Evangelism Leadership Council, several weeks ago. And one of the things that I heard from one of the pastors who was presenting was talking about the importance of pastoral care. They were doing a presentation and preparing elders for leadership. But I think now with access to sermons, so for instance, I can get the best sermons that we've ever heard online right now, right? But what I can't get is necessarily the spiritual care that is needed on a weekly and daily basis from something online, for instance, right? And so I think that, yes, we're telling people that we need mental health professionals, and there's certain things that are maybe beyond the capacity of our elders and our pastors. But I think what I'm calling soul care is where there are a lot of people who are struggling. I have some colleagues that went to our high school and to our college, and one of them in conversation recently shared with me that they are atheists because of certain things that they had experienced in their church life and their experiences related to our schools, right? They had been exposed to things. They had learned some things that disturbed their spirit. And I think what's going to be important is the change is not going to be just a sermon. A change is going to be that personal touch. And I think pastoral care in this moment will be important as we move forward.
Well, I think the difference is the same difference you have. We keep it in the school system. The same difference you have if you go to a class and you're in the auditorium and you're watching something on the screen versus if you have a teacher that's doing one-on-one, coming to your desk, helping you through it. If you got a tutor outside of class, I mean, it's the difference between a lecture or a situation where you can ask questions, talk, get some serious help. And so, yeah, we got to be ready, not to just lecture.
Mhm.
You know, it takes more than that. And if again, because we on this Sabbath school, we back on Paul again. Paul did the same thing Jesus did. Jesus had his disciples. He might lecture to the crowd, but he was teaching those disciples, answering those questions, spending time with them. The disciples got to see how he was living. They got to walk like he walked, to walk in his footsteps. So when he left, they could do that. Same thing, Paul had Timothy. Everywhere Paul went, like he established a group of people, and then he wrote letters and kept in touch with them. How's the church going? What's going on over there? Well, let me give you some advice. Paul, everywhere he went, he got people that would continue to do the thing, but it was hands-on. Paul had relationships. We have half of the Bible we have because Paul was writing letters to people that he came, saw, and then left. And we are reading those letters and dealing with that in Sabbath school right now. Jason O'Rourke.
All right. Yeah, I think those are very excellent points. And let me just add very quickly is that in Paul, and the lesson brings out very clearly that Paul ministered in his context. And sometimes, when you read some of these epistles, you read some of these books in the New Testament, it would almost be like for some of us, we might even put it in a different context. Because really, how many of us would really identify with the church from being inside a prison, from our leadership being inside the prison? What if our conference president or our union or somebody was writing, encouraging us, from a prison cell? And the reality of it is that when you see a similarity that Paul, he was unjustly put there because he was spreading the gospel, and a similarity from the context that made Martin Luther King a little different was that there's some other folks that talk about today is that his leadership, he went to and was in those prisons, and he was able to still motivate and lead the people because he identified with the people. Paul identified with Timothy and the members at those various churches.
One of the elements from this story about Paul is what I think a lot of slave masters did in terms of certain pieces of the Bible. They would take certain things to kind of twist it in a way that would confirm the system of slavery, to give it some kind of divine covering. And so when Paul tells, Onesimus to go back to his master, that of course was used as a kind of way to inform slaves. You see, this is God's endorsement and condemnation, an endorsement of slavery and your role as a slave. And in fact, to run away is a sin against God. And so, could you all shed some light about that particular environment that Paul is speaking to this slave in, and how it is distinguished from American 19th century slavery, that we know was uniquely evil? Because a lot of times you hear people like Candace Owens saying, well, everywhere had slavery. Yeah, but not everywhere had slavery quite like the United States of America's brand and flavor of slavery. There are those who say, well, we're steering into social activism, and this is dangerous because social activism is replacing the gospel. Now, wouldn't that sentiment be in alignment with someone who's comfortable with the status quo, who's comfortable with the way certain systems of oppression have always been operating?
Well, there's the sort of keep the peace nature of that text. I'll be the first to tell you I've never preached it. I don't know if I plan on preaching that text. I got a whole bunch of other Bible to deal with, but because I ain't necessarily trying to keep the peace when the peace ain't right. There's a lot of things that happen in the Bible. I mean, I got one wife, but I know some folks biblically that have more. And so I ain't here to endorse none of that, none of the stuff All right, so I got one wife. She pretty enough for me, but so yeah, I don't necessarily want to touch that whatever it was, it wasn't. It probably wasn't. Look, even the people that had multiple wives in the Bible, that don't mean they was comfortable. All the drama they had from having all them wives. Like just because there was a slave in the Bible that the man said go back or something, don't mean that the slavery was right or cool or better than our slavery or whatever. Dude, I'm glad we out of slavery, but we still got issues that we can speak to. But I'm sorry, man. I ain't preaching that text. Y'all fire me. Holy Ghost ain't give me the answer to that text right there. Okay, O'Rourke might have the answer.
Dr. O'Rourke.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
We
Yes.
got you.
Okay. I think that there's so first of all, part of the text that's in there is if you read that's Philemon, if you read the book of Philemon, the gentleman Paul speaks to Philemon and says, hey, if there is anything he owes you, as if Philemon might have stolen, Onesimus might have stolen something, it's like charge it to my account. I will pay when I come to you. So there's a crime that took place in the story as well, not just being a runaway slave. There was some theft that took place. Okay, so we have to deal with that context. Secondly, Onesimus would have been a slave if he was either a conquered person or if he was in debt. Okay, debt slavery and being a slave as a conquered person were par for the course throughout the ancient world. These are all facts. Right? No issues there at all. When you come to American chattel slavery, it's different. It's called chattel slavery because you were not considered a human being. And they created breeding farms for American chattel slavery. You were not a human, and being born put you in an endless cycle of enslavement. No such thing happened in the past. You couldn't be born a slave. You could be conquered, you could be indentured, but you were not birthed into it based on anything that was not par for the course. So those things make American chattel slavery a little bit unique. When Paul says he sends him back to his master, well, Paul meets him in jail. The young man's about to get out, and the young man is converted, right? The young man is converted. The young man, Paul sends him back. I'm sending him back to you. And if you read the text, he's not sending him back as a slave. Sends him back as a brother. That's the next part of the text. He sends him back as an equal. And elsewhere in Paul's statements, he says there is no Jew or slave, Jew or Gentile, bond or free. So for Paul, in the kingdom, those things should not exist. Even if they exist in the empire, they should not exist in the kingdom. So Paul's theological emphasis is on expanding the kingdom, even if it is within a social construct. Therefore, when you see him talk about 1 Corinthians, and he's talking about the Lord's table, and he says, some of you get sick and die at the Lord's table. Well, what was happening? The rich were eating based on social hierarchy, and there was not a class ecumenicalism when it comes to the Lord's Supper or the meal. And so people were dying due to class hierarchy, and he calls that a judgment of God that should not exist. And so, again, if we read how the church operated in the first century, it grew among the underclass. Like, this is where an understanding of history comes in before we start trying to proof text Paul, because Paul can be used for anything, just like Moses can be used for anything if you want to justify it. But historical context informs us as to what Paul is doing. So Paul is not endorsing the ownership of another person. That's not what he's doing. He actually tells Philemon that he is as much a son of Paul's as Onesimus is. And yet in the same letter, Paul calls Philemon his brother. So Paul is destroying all of these hierarchies in one very short letter, right? But because we were operating from a Western society that has privileged the slaveholder that decided to genocide one large color scheme of people and permanently enslave another large color scheme of people and perpetually attempt to enslave them and even have them crossbreeding within themselves because they were vile. We think that that's what Paul is endorsing, and that's categorically false.
I'm glad you brought that up. And it'll also, there's folks that say, well, Ellen White makes no mention of that. Well, Ellen White also, and it was said in this lesson, conveyed to the church, and we said this on this program before, do not obey the Fugitive Slave Act. I've heard so many, and I will say this, and I know it may sound controversial, but I said it. I'm saying it because this is what I've seen firsthand from many so-called fellow believers. They would look at a woman being dragged out of a car in the middle of the highway in front of her children and say, well, the law is the law, and we're a nation of laws, and if we don't have a border, then we don't have a country. Very MAGA-like language, forgetting that slavery was also once the law, and we were called to disobey that law. And so, if you've ever seen the movie Harriet, a biopic about Harriet Tubman from 2019, there's this unique scene in that movie towards the end of, a little after the midway mark of that movie, where they show the Fugitive Slave Act being passed. And when the announcement comes out to the folks in the North, it's like everyone for themselves. It's like a dark cloud comes over everyone, because they realize that even if you have been completely free your whole life, you could be subject to being taken and kidnapped, similar to how folks are being kidnapped by ICE, whether they're sitting in their churches, whether they're sitting in, their places of work, or in their vehicles, and being shipped off to a land that they have no knowledge of, no ties to, and subjected to very inhumane treatment. What are your thoughts, Dr. Freeman, about the call to disobey that particular law, and how it connects with us today in the 21st century when we're looking at modern attempts to bring us back to this sort of post civil rights era, antebellum South, very, very antiquated Wild West environment that we see Project 2025 already taking place. Look, we're in 2026, and we've seen Project 2025 reshape this country like no other public policy document. What are your thoughts, Dr. Freeman?
I keep on thinking about the words of MLK. I believe it was MLK who said, it. Yeah, any unjust law is not really a law at all. I'm not saying
I got it right here. All right. A quote about unjust laws it's a letter from the Birmingham jail. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Mm-hmm. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. He further defined an unjust law as one that uplifts a just law is one that uplifts human personality is just, while one that degrades human personality is unjust.
Perfect. And I think that we have to push for justice. I think one of the challenges that we have is that because within our faith tradition, we have not been, in some cases, have not been encouraged to push against some of the unjust practices within the church. And we center a lot of the things that we do based on what we've learned through church school, through Sabbath school, and all these different things, right? What happens is that then when we're encouraging members to push against laws that may be perceived as unjust more broadly, they have not had that muscle of pushing back. When I'm talking about unjust laws or unjust things that are going on, we can think about women's ordination. We can think about some of the racial things that happen in our academies and our schools. I think these are things when we're talking about justice and pushing for justice. It's not just laws that are coming from the federal government, state government. It's also within the church. And so if we're going to be telling members to act like Christ and to push for justice, I think we have to think about both inside the church and outside the church, how we push for justice.
I want to add something to what Sidney said. I think it's very important to remember that the first century church believers had no rights. I think it's very important. To be a Christian in the first century meant you were absolutely illegal. You could be thrown out of the synagogue and you could be killed by Rome. That follows all the way through Polycarp. That follows all the way to the Donatists, I think, of the 2nd or 3rd century. They were the very first Christians to fight back against the state. And it's because they were Romans and they could not envision not being a part of Roman civilization. The first century Christians, if you were a Roman citizen and you became a Christian in the first century, you could lose your inheritance. Your father could kick you out. You lost all right you lost all other rights that went along with being a Roman citizen because being a Christian was illegal. Okay? It was illegal. And so that's why you have the catacombs and things, people sneaking around because they knew it was illegal. Right? Now, what happens? What happens? There's a difference here. And this is what I think you see in the first century. They could not fight against Rome. There's no way they could. There's literally nothing they could do. Rome was a killing machine. Fundamentally, philosophically, Rome was a killing empire. End of story. They perfected the art of war. They did, right? So you're not going to beat them in a war. You're not going to beat them, and you're not going to convince them philosophically. That's what happens when you get to the 2nd century. Justin Martyr and the apologists start trying to make a philosophical case for allowing Christians to exist. They don't necessarily win, but be that as it may. In the first century, what do you have? Do they withstand the empire, or do they stand with the underclass? See, I think that's part of the challenge that we have is that we have been taught. Our denomination has taught us not only they have not only not encouraged us to participate in seeking for justice, they have actually discouraged us in seeking for justice. It's been an active discouragement in seeking for justice and saying anything. It equates to basically shut up and dribble. That's basically what happened in 2020, particularly when black Adventists were like, "Yo, Black Lives Matter," and the GC president said, "Stop doing social justice and preach the 3 angels." That's basically shut up and dribble. Because for the entire 20th century, Adventists have either no record or an anti-record on justice. Let's be very clear. It's either no record at all or an anti-record. And I can run the history of failures if you like. But be that as it may, what do we see in the first century? They stood with each other. They weren't fighting the empire. They were supporting the underclass. They were healing the oppressed.
Wow.
They were feeding the widow. They were housing the orphan. They were not. The problem that I have, and I stand, I'm driving, and so that makes me animated because I got to keep my eyes on the road. A challenge that we run with is that fighting injustice centers the unjust person. It centers them as the thing to beat. Instead of simply creating what needs to be created, we're so busy fighting the unjust, and that becomes the center of our presentations, the center of our activity, etc. No, I expect prices to go up. Do you have food at your church? I expect rents to go up. Do you all have a way that you can house people? I expect these things. How will I stand with my congregation? I don't give a darn about the empire. The empire will empire. They always will, because they always have. There's nothing that everything we have the privilege of having right now is paid for on the backs of the injustice of the prison system. Everything. And if it's not the prison system, it's big business overseas, pimping other countries and taking and exploiting their business. Am I right or wrong?
No.
See? So withstanding the system is not the point. Standing with those around you that are suffering, that is the point. So how do I stand with the person driving, getting drug out of their car? How do I stand with somebody getting their house broken into and getting drug out? How do I stand with the old lady who can't pay her bills and must choose between medical expenses and dog food? How do I stand with? How am I with you? I don't care about them. They are going to be jerks. That's what they do. It's the history of the country. Nobody can tell me otherwise. You can't find me one time in this nation's history where we have had 50 years of peace. And then I'll go one further. You can't name me one 50-year period in American history where black people have had peace. You can't name it.
Yeah.
If you've experienced peace in the last 50 years, it's because you didn't have Wi-Fi and you didn't have a cell phone to notice all the non-peace going on around you in the neighborhood down the street. So we have to stop this shenanigan of thinking you're gonna beat an empire that is exponentially large, that has the entire system rigged, right? They have the judiciary, they have the legislature, they have the executive, they have the military. They're paying $100,000 to people with no education to be ICE people with no training and giving them a $45,000 bonus, and they have a hotline for you to rat people out on. Stop. The question is not how do I fight them. The question is how do I help you?
Well, can I follow up and say that it seems like we want the endorsement of empire, and it's,
Come on now.
and so I think that's a part of the problem. So even if we are part of the underserved, the underclass, there is a sense of, and we may be the leaders within the underclass, right? But we are seeking the endorsement of those that are in power, which often compromises some of the work that could be done to support our people. I just
Come on, Sydney. Come on, Sydney. You're talking good now, Doc. You cooking with grease now.
Let me throw that in there too. That yes, most of us, 99.9% of us need to go ahead and help the people. But Paul was that 0.1%. And Paul ended up standing before the people in power. And so for such a time as this, we just got to be ready. If we ever put in that position, we got to be ready to speak out. We can't turn our wheels. We can't turn all our wheels on fighting the empire when you got hungry people out here, when you got to help the people out here.
Talk about it.
But we got to be ready that, especially now with social media, we just got to be ready that if the time does hit, if the microphone is in your face, that's when we can speak out.
Well, like Jesus tells us, Kay, he tells you that you're going to be drugged before kings and you're going to be drugged. Like, it's going to happen. Like, you ain't got to go looking for it. You ain't got to be out there looking for it. They going to come get you. If you doing the work that he did, they coming. Like, you got to know they coming. So, like, you ain't going. And when it's your time, it's your time. Even Jesus dipped on him a couple times because it wasn't his time. And then when it was his time, he stood there and took the L. Like, let's call it what it is. But no. We got to call it what it is. If you're doing the work in an empire that's unjust, they coming.
I hear you.
In that same vein that Dr. Freeman was just saying, in terms of, we want the endorsement of the empire. A lot of Adventists these days want the endorsement, it seems, of this particular empire as it pertains to certain principles we've already known to be true, such as the Sabbath, right? White Christian nationalist Charlie Kirk, comes out with a book and his, departure, touching on the Sabbath, and all of a sudden you have the most prominent of our pastors at the forefront, looking at this book as a kind of, this is a wonderful way to kind of segue or get folks from the outside who are not familiar with Sabbath keeping and Sabbath truths into the fold. And it's amazing to me how we are able to separate, in this context, all of the evil and bigotry that this man spouted and represented for his entire 30-something years, right? And folks are like, let Charlie Kirk die. Well, yeah, we want him to die, but the book continues to live on and have influence. So, this is relevant, especially when it's being used by folks that we have become familiar and accustomed with as those who are the lead figures on evangelistic tools and outreach tools like Amazing Facts. And so when you look at Colossus was surrounded by competing gods, values, and cultural pressures. Paul's concern wasn't prosecution so much as assimilation. And today we're seeing something similar when figures like Kirk, often associated with white Christian nationalism, write appreciatively about the Sabbath, and then some Seventh-day Adventist pastors find themselves resonating with this particular endorsement. How do modern believers remain faithful to biblical truth without either withdrawing from the public square or baptizing political movements and white Christian nationalism that does not share the gospel's moral center? Where's the line between principal engagement and dangerous alignment?
Jesus. I have a rule that's very simple. I listen and look for Jesus, and where I see him, I'm dealing with a fellow believer, and I'm looking at someone in the kingdom of God. And where I don't, I'm dealing with a Babylonian, and that is how I deal.
Look, I'm a
I'm not.
Pittsburgh Steelers fan, Doc. If I go to a Steelers game, there's gonna be some people there that like my team, but we don't think anything alike. Like there's gonna be people there, and just because we root for the same team, I don't agree with every position that they have. And the reality is, we can't look at something somebody does and then endorse the whole person. And likewise, you know, the reality is, we might agree with one thing here, or we might agree with most things. But there's some people that I'm real cool with. Well, I can't name no names, but I'm just saying. I know some black racist people, all right? All right, but but I might agree with them on some stuff, but I ain't down with you on everything you say. And so, like my man said, it's all about Jesus. And yeah, just because somebody say one thing right, you can't take the whole, endorse everything they say. Or
Listen, everything biblical ain't Christian. And we need to get that down. Everything biblical ain't Christian. Polygamy is biblical. It ain't Christian. You understand? Killing your kids if they disrespectful is biblical. It ain't Christian.
Wow.
Right? Slavery is biblical. It ain't Christian. You understand? Multiple wives, all kind of chaos, craziness in the Bible is biblical. It ain't Christian. You understand? Everything biblical ain't Christian. The standard and rule of conduct and ethics and morals of holiness, righteousness, values, and identity for a Christian is not Bible, it's Jesus. Everything biblical is not Christian, but everything Christian is biblical.
I have
even when we start talking about the laws and stuff, like you talking about the lady getting dragged out of her car. The reality is, even if the law is just, if the way you execute the law or enforce the law looks like you dragging a lady out of her car, that's when it's all messed up and twisted. And so even things that are biblical, when exercised in the wrong way, you've left Christ. I'm sorry, Freeman. Go ahead, Doc.
No, I was in my mind, and Dr. O'Rourke can tell me if I'm wrong. But do we find ourselves in a historical moment? I'm thinking about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, when I know in maybe in 1919 or somewhere thereabout, where we really, as a Seventh-day Adventist church in North America, really sought kind of the endorsement of Protestant Christendom, and we really wanted to feel like we were a part, and so we allowed for many of the things that we may have previously believed. When we talk about abolitionism and things like that, that kind of got pushed down, and to kind of identify with more of the broader Christendom in North America, we compromised many of our values. I'm wondering if we're finding ourselves in a similar moment where we're seeking the endorsement of the broader public for whatever the reason is, and we find ourselves in another challenging spot in our history as Seventh-day Adventists.
So to answer your question, Was there a movement? Absolutely, there was. And this will be very brief. In 1888, we had the Righteousness by Faith movement that for A.T. Jones was supposed to be vertical, righteousness by faith between me and God. And it was also supposed to be horizontal, righteousness by faith between me and my fellow human. That would have boded well in 1888 for the underclass during 1888. Who was the underclass? The underclass was Black people. But because we were in the business of baptizing Southerners and not demanding that they jettison their racism, that didn't fly well. So I'm sorry that you were only told it was about Sunday. It was also about ethnic ecumenicalism, and we weren't down with it. The 1890s happened, and we had people that were in leadership in Battle Creek at the time when Ellen White had been exiled to Australia, who were supporters of Southern segregation and did not like Lincoln. And she keep politics out of their mouth and out of the pulpit. She told them to keep politics out of the pulpit. Not everybody, them. That's what she said. However, you move to the early 1900s, A.T. Jones is the editor of the Review, and he is still dragging America in print for militarism, materialism, and racism, and slavery and its child or parent racism. And so what happens? Come 1916, we get visited by the government, and they said, you all sound like socialists. You need to change what you say about America. Come 1917, we took America in Prophecy, that chapter, out of Bible Readings for the Home, the book. Come 1919, we had redefined evangelism to only be talking about the religious horn of the two-horned beast. And so the other horn, which is civic engagement or civil liberties, we stopped talking about altogether. Why? Because it would have benefited, who's the underclass? Black people at that time. And so what's happening? So that's what happened. Come 1922, we are sociological evangelicals. 1940s roll around. We're at the beginning of so with that at the background, here comes 1940s. And who's writing? M.L. Andreasen. What's he writing? Last Generation Theology. And Last Generation Theology is entirely and only about a self-driven, legalistic, vertical approach to God that says that God needs to beat Satan so badly that Jesus was not good enough, and therefore I must personally overcome sin in my life by imitating Jesus so that God can gain the victory. And for the entire 20th century, we have been fighting a fight that centers on us rejecting Jesus. Period. That is it. And so to the point of ladies, you can get out the car now. Thank you. Out.
Can I say can they wave first?
Girls, say hi to Uncle K. All right, now back to the point of us loving people because they have the Sabbath. We loved Hitler because he was a vegetarian. Like these failures that I just listed for you made the way for us to love the Nazi Party, even to the point of bringing a Nazi to America to speak to the North American Division.
Oh, Lord.
This type of the failure of 1888 allowed for Kellogg and other Adventists to be eugenicists. Do you understand? Our historic theological failures had sociological impacts, and we have been living. I don't think. Listen, here's the thing, Sydney. Because thank you for the question. I don't think that I think we're at a crossroads where we get our soul back.
Wow.
Because we've been living the entire 20th century soulless. Because we accepted evangelicalism in the 1920s. That's not me. That's Michael Campbell in his book 1922. You can also read his book 1919. You can also listen to Kevin Burton online. Like, I'm not making it up. These are Adventist historians doing the work. I'm just telling you what they did. We have preached a unicorn gospel that is not in the book of Revelation at all, a one-horned beast. And our entire denomination in North America is bereft of social engagement. And we have been aligned with white supremacist evangelicals to the degree that in the civil rights movement, when everybody else is saying we need to be doing right by America, by black people, that we're done with this, right? The Adventist Review and Herald, F. Nichols is the editor and his assistant, put in print anyone, particularly ministers, who participates in the civil rights movement is apostate because they are part of a murderous revolution bent on bloodshed, and not a black person that was doing the foolishness at that time. The murderous revolution bent on bloodshed was segregation. The murderous revolution bent on bloodshed was Southern not integrating, being the last school to integrate. in Adventism. The murderous revolution on bloodshed, but on bloodshed was the last Adventist school hospitals to integrate. That caused the death of that lady.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of here. But because we don't know our own history, we know more about propaganda Adventism than we do about actual Adventism. And the mistakes we have made, and the well-intended foolishness that continues to be spewed. People lining up. Listen, listen, I know military guys. There are people that storm the beaches of Normandy that are appalled at what is going on right now. Appalled. You hear what I'm telling you? Disgusted, frightened. They don't even know what they fought for.
Yeah.
You understand? But here. Listen, in South. Listen, I'm talking to your people them in the chat. I don't even know who's in the chat right now. The Adventist church in South Africa was so committed to apartheid. We divided the church up into 3 tiers: whites, coloreds, and blacks. We were known as the apartheid church. Mandela refused to set foot in an Adventist church even after he came out. He refused. Like when we have a problem lining up on the wrong side historically in the 20th century. We have a problem, and it's because we have only talked religion. And it's only been individual vertical piety with God. It has required nothing laterally. Absolutely nothing. And so we line up on the wrong side every time. Because as long as I'm right with God, I kept the law. And since you're so legalistic based, I had a conversation with somebody today. We have these conservative preachers. I'll say it, but I ain't going to say their names. Their entire lens, Kagia, for preaching, 3 points. And they only got 3: law, end time events, and health.
Mm-hmm.
Think of your favorite conservative preacher. Think of him. He ain't preached Jesus in a year of blue moons. He wouldn't know Jesus if he walked down the street in flip-flops. And then y'all sitting there, y'all people sitting y'all's tied to them, and y'all get mad at the church. Man, kick rocks. Kick rocks. Y'all up talking this craziness. Why? Why do they exist? Because we ignored and we reject a Jesus that demands as much horizontal righteousness by faith as there is vertical righteousness by faith. Let me tell you what that means. It means I am declared righteous before I behave righteous. I am treated worthy before I behave worthy. My worthiness comes from being treated like I'm worthy. I learned that I'm worthy because you treated me like I'm worthy. That is what God does for us. Victory comes by knowing that I am loved and receiving the grace. That's where victory comes. If that is how you overcome in your personal life, then that is how somebody else overcomes in your lateral life. The more you pour into them, the more they know they are loved, the more they want to love you and not hurt you. If that's the way God works, that's the way this works. But when you're a materialistic, racist, sexist, classist culture, you have no value for your next man.
Mm.
Yep.
You have no value. But you the remnant. Little Jesus at the end of time. Kick rocks. Get out of here.
And that's the thing. Paul doesn't overthrow slavery directly, but he undermines it relationally, right? Go back to him as a brother, like you alluded to past Dr. O'Rourke. So it's slow relational transformation, more faithful than loud moral absolutism.
Say the question again.
I think I'm saying, just like I said earlier, like I ain't LeBron. Like I can do what I can do. But if I had the mic, I could do more. So it's for such a time as this. Some people are positioned to be able to be loud and to be there and to make a difference. And many of us are positioned to help, like you said earlier, to help the person who's in need. To assist the people that are being hurt by the empire, and there's 1 or 2 people in position to speak to the empire. There's some people in the room and some people that are not in the room, And I don't think we should sit here and say what's what or what you need to be doing. It depends on where you are, where God put you. That man, Paul, what we read about in this Sabbath school lesson, everywhere God put him, he did it. He did what he needed to do, whether he was in a little bitty prison or whether he was before the king. And that's all we could do is where God is work it where God put us.
Dr. Rourke or Dr. Freeman?
What's the question again?
Oh, the question was, Paul doesn't overthrow slavery directly, but he undermines it relationally. So is slow relational transformation more faithful than loud moral absolutism?
So I'm not going to either or it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. Paul would have been killed on the spot for loud moral absolutism. He would have been killed on the spot, and so he made a decision. I'm not going to either or it. What I will say is that the kingdom of God does not operate based on the kingdom of man. I will say that, and the kingdom of God operates on love and grace and gentleness and forgiveness and patience. That those are the weapons of the kingdom of God. I'm sorry, they are. Those are the weapons of the kingdom of God. That is what it is. That's just what it is. So anywhere where I can be a part of the character of Jesus, right? That's the kingdom of God, right? The empire invites me to engage. Look, it's in Ephesians. For we wrestle not against prince and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. That's what it says. And it's telling you that you wrestle. It's a 4-on-1. Why are you wrestling? The text tells you to stand up and put on Jesus. That's what the text says. In Ephesians, put on Jesus. It tells you to put on the armor. And in Romans, that armor is Christ. It tells you to put on Christ. So if I'm putting on Christ, then I have to look and see what Christ does. How does Christ engage people? That's the question. How does he do it? How did he instruct his disciples, or at least demonstrate for his disciples to do it? How do we see that take place? Right? That's the question. If anybody wants to go walk down the street with a placard, that's your business. That's your business, right? Fine. I'm not here to fight that fight. And I got members at my church that need utilities paid. Like, I'm marching down the street asking for the empire to be just. Name one apocalyptic beast that is known for being just. They don't exist. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why people go hard on America. And the Americans don't understand it, and it's because we swallow the Kool-Aid. People go hard on Western civilization, America particularly, because it claims Jesus. So when you claim Jesus, then you open yourself up to critique because people can read how Jesus treated people. Right? But if you know, like Adventists know, the apocalypse, and you know that there's not a godly beast among them, what are you expecting from these people? They're monsters. You got a two-winged lion, a hunchback bear, a hydra for a leopard, an abominable hydra for the fourth beast. You turn around and you got a four-horned goat in chapter 8, and what the heck? What's going? You got a lightning fast ram. You understand? You come to Revelation, you got a multicolored sea beast in a dragon in chapter 12, a multicolored hydra in chapter 13. Then you got the image of the beast. What is going? A lamb-like beast that breathes fire. Which one of these is actually just? What are you expecting? You're expecting justice from entities that have never been just. It is literally the definition of insanity.
Help the people.
We are not supposed to expect justice from the empire. We are supposed to create the alternative kingdom in which justice is met out. Wow. That is what you see in the Bible. That's what you see. They don't ask anybody to care for the poor. They care for the poor. They don't ask nobody to care for the widow. They care for the widow. Care for the orphan. They do. They don't ask anybody to do anything, but they do it themselves. They do it. And anybody that does not listen, here's the trick. And see, this is why we don't see. Help me, Holy Ghost. I'm sorry. I love Kagia and Sydney. I'm sorry, guys. I've had a very choleric day. I apologize. The first century church. Watch this. Watch this. You cut up and be a materialist, be a classist. What happens? You die. Immediate death. Ananias and Sapphira. You in the kingdom operating on classism. And partial ethnocentrism, death. What happens in 1 Corinthians? You in the kingdom acting on classism, treating poor people like they're less than, death. Y'all want primitive godliness? Welcome to death, because God ain't gonna have that. His place is supposed to be a place where life happens. Life don't happen based on classism. Life ain't happening based on racism. Life ain't happening based on ethnocentrism. Life ain't happening based on ageism. Life ain't happening based on ableism. Life ain't happening. And so you're not allowed to do it. And if you do it, the promise is death.
Mm.
I'm not fighting the empire. If I fight, I do not expect justice from an empire that is a beast of revelation.
A monster.
It's a monster.
Mm.
Hey man, we way over time, y'all.
Imagine Odysseus. Imagine Odysseus in the Odyssey on his boat trying to negotiate with Scylla and Charybdis. What? That makes no sense. He runs from them, or does his best to.
This has been a fascinating, wonderful discussion, and as we're concluding, there's one more layer we can't ignore. This conversation isn't happening in the middle of the year. It isn't accidental timing. This is the first Sabbath of a brand new year, the first episode of 2026, which means we're not just reflecting on Joshua's final words. We're standing at our own threshold, a new calendar, a clean page, fresh intentions, old habits waiting to be renegotiated. And the irony is powerful. Joshua speaks at the end of a long journey, and we're listening at the beginning of a new one. But the question is the same. Not what will God do this year? He's already proven who he is. The real question is, who will we choose to be now that we know he's faithful? Because the first Sabbath isn't just about rest, it's about realignment, about deciding before the noise rushes back in, before comfort sets the agenda, before pressure replaces purpose. Who gets our allegiance in this new year? And as the example of Paul shows in reconciling Onesimus with his master and challenging the system of slavery of his time, which is no way in any way, shape, or form as evil as American slavery, we too are called to reunite folks and challenge evil and broken systems that are designed to place hierarchy and place one person above another. So as 2026 opens, Joshua's voice echoes and Paul's voice echoes forward, not with nostalgia, not with fear, but with clarity. God has done his part again and again and again. Now on the very first Sabbath of 2026, choose this day who you will serve. Thank you so much, Dr. Jason O'Rourke. Thank you, Pastor Kagia Scott. And thank you, Dr. Sidney Freeman Jr., for such a wonderful discussion to start off the year. I'm so grateful for each of you, gentlemen. You could have been doing anything with your evening, but you chose to share some wisdom and shed some light on the Word of God tonight. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for what you brought to the table. With that being said, that's going to conclude tonight's episode of the Escape Room Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.